Okay, let's jump in. You handed us a stack of sources all about a key intelligence organization within the South Korean military.
Hmm.
This deep dive is all about pulling out the most important stuff from that material, tracing its roots, figuring out what it does, and digging into some of the notable, sometimes controversial moments the documents highlight.
Right. We're looking at an intelligence command embedded within the Republic of Korea Armed Forces.
Yeah.
And the history laid out in these sources is pretty telling. It shows an organization that's, well, evolved significantly and had a real impact on the country's trajectory.
Absolutely. So think of this as your quick start guide, powered by the sources you provided. We're going to go from its beginnings,
Yeah.
understand its core jobs as described in the material, and then spend some time on those specific historical events the sources flagged. By the end, you'll have a solid grasp on this organization's story.
Hopefully, yeah.
All right, let's kick off with the basics. What's the current picture of this organization, according to the sources?
Okay, so today it's known as the Defense Counterintelligence Command, or DCC for short.
DCC, got it.
It's an inter-service command within the ROK Armed Forces, and it sits under the Ministry of Defense.
And its home base. Where are they headquartered?
Headquarters are located in Gwacheon, South Korea. That's what the sources say.
Okay. The documents also list its official motto, which is quite a statement.
Yeah, it is.
Limitless dedication for the protection of liberty of the Republic of Korea.
A powerful motto indeed, straight from the material. And the sources identify the current commander as LT Gen Yo In-young.
Yo and Young, okay.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting. The material also lists some significant figures from its past leadership. Names like General Chun Do-won,
Right.
General Ro Tai-woo,
Okay.
and Lieutenant General Chang Do-young. Those names might ring a bell, depending on, your familiarity with modern Korean history. Definitely names associated with significant periods. Okay, so that's the who and where right now. But here's where it gets really interesting. Looking at the journey this organization took to get here, according to the sources.
Yeah, the history is quite something. The story starts way back on October 21st, 1950. It was initially founded as the Army Counterintelligence Corps, or CIC, sometimes called KSIC.
CIC, so initially very Army-centric then.
Seems that way, yeah.
And the sources point to a major structural change later on, didn't they?
Oh, yeah, a really significant one in October 1977. That's when it was formally activated as the Military Security Command, or MSC.
MSC, okay.
And this wasn't just a simple renaming, it was a consolidation. The sources say it merged the Army Security Command, the Navy Security Unit, and the Air Force Office of Special Investigations.
Wow, so bringing all those individual service intelligence wings under one roof?
Exactly.
And the material emphasizes a crucial point about its authority after that merger, right?
It does. It became a single integrated unit under the direct command and operational control of the Minister of National Defense.
Direct command.
Yeah. Now, while the sources don't necessarily spell out every implication, having that direct line to the minister is highlighted and suggests, a significant elevation in its access and potential influence at that time.
Makes sense. And this organization has gone through a few identity changes over the decades. It wasn't always the MSC or the current DCC.
No, it's had quite the evolution, just looking at the names documented here. Military Security Command, MSC, from 77 to 1990.
Okay.
Then Defense Security Command, DSC, from 1991 to 2018. That's a long stretch as DSC.
Right.
Then there was a short period as the Defense Security Support Command, DSSC, from 2018 to 2022, before
Interesting.
becoming the current Defense Counterintelligence Command, DCC, with a reorganization on November 1st, 2022.
So MSC, DSC, DSSC, DCC. It's like tracing different eras, maybe different perceptions or functions just through its titles?
Yeah, it definitely shows a history of reinvention or perhaps reaction to events.
Okay. Now, based purely on the list provided in your source material, what were the main jobs or missions of this organization? What's it supposed to do?
Well, the documents lay out a set of primary responsibilities. They list things like clandestine and covert operations,
Okay.
counterintelligence, defense industry security, forensic investigations, HUMT, that's human intelligence and military security.
So a pretty broad mandate. It sounds like it's aimed at protecting the military from threats, both internal and external, often through, well, less overt means.
That seems to be the scope, yes. Counterintelligence, security investigations, that kind of thing.
Okay, we've got the structure, the history, the stated mission. But the source material you provided also delves into specific historical events where the organization, particularly under its DSC name, played roles that drew significant criticism. This is where it gets complex.
Yes, the documents don't shy away from highlighting these moments. And it's important, like you said, to look at these purely as they are presented in the sources, noting the specific claims made about the organization's involvement.
Right, just reporting what the sources say. And the material points directly to the DSC's role in events surrounding 1979.
It does. The sources state that Chun Doo-hwan became the chief of the DSC in February 1979.
Okay, the future president.
Right. Following the assassination of President Park Chung-hee later that year, in October, the material, citing other work, says Chun effectively took control of the investigation from his position at the DSC.
Right, from within the DSC.
Then on December 12, 1979, the sources describe a group of generals, led by Chun, arresting the Army Chief of Staff and seizing key sites in the capital.
And how does the source characterize that specific action on December 12th? What term does it use?
The sources explicitly state that the DSC's involvement in the events of December 1979 was, and I'm quoting the description here, considered and defined as attempt of a coup by state council.
Defined as an attempted coup. Okay, that's significant language from the source.
It is.
The sources also bring up the Gwangju uprising. What do they say about the DSC's actions there?
According to the source material, during the uprising, many plainclothed DSC operatives were present, disguised among the protesters.
Plainclothes, okay.
The documents state they conducted covert operations against the civilian militia that had formed during the uprising.
And what were the alleged goals of those operations, according to these sources?
Well, the sources list their objectives as intending to arrest and detain militia members illegally.
Illegally?
And fabricating lies and calumnies about militia to ruin the militia's reputation and make the uprising look like North Korean operatives involved.
Wow.
Again, that's what the source material claims about their actions and intent during that period in Gwangju.
Fabricating North Korean involvement. Okay. Fast forward a bit. The sources mention an instance of illegal surveillance too, right? More recently.
They do. The material points to an event on November 11th, 2011. This is when the Seoul National Labor Relations Commission reportedly exposed a member of the Defense Security Command, the DSC.
Exposed for what?
According to the sources, this individual had been illegally collecting the information of civilians registered in the National Health Insurance Corporation. And not just briefly, for 3.5 years.
3.5 years collecting civilian health data illegally. That's a specific instance of alleged unauthorized data collection highlighted.
Yes, exactly.
And the sources even bring up planning related to potential self-coups, linking it to both the DSC and, more recently, the current DCC. This sounds pretty explosive.
This is certainly a striking detail from the sources, yes. The documents state that before the impeachment of President Park Geun-hye, which was in March 2017,
Right.
the DSC was allegedly planning a self-coup and declaration of martial law.
A self-coup plan? What was the context given in the sources for that?
The context given in the sources was in anticipation of prolonged protests, specifically if the impeachment of Park Geun-hye failed. They were apparently planning for that contingency.
Okay, so a contingency plan involving martial law.
And the sources add that the document detailing this alleged self-coup plan by the DSC was revealed publicly in 2018.
It became public knowledge then. And the material says something similar, or related, has happened recently, with the current DCC.
Yes, this is perhaps the most recent point mentioned. The source material states that as recently as December 2024, the current Defense Counterintelligence Command, DCC, was involved in what the source described as another self-coup plan for President Yoon Suk-yeol.
December 2024, so very recent, and described again as a self-coup plan.
That's how it's presented in the sources, as a recent documented event involving the DCC.
Wow, that's quite a heavy thread of documented controversies running through the history of this organization, according to the sources you shared. Coup attempt, Gwangju actions, surveillance, multiple self-coup plans alleged.
It certainly highlights instances where the organization's activities, as reported in the material, seem to have extended into areas that drew intense public and official scrutiny. It's quite a pattern laid out here.
Yeah, it really is. So, taking all of this in the organization's role, its evolution, its stated functions, and these specific documented historical controversies, what's the key takeaway here for you, the listener, based only on the source material we've been discussing?
Well, what stands out to me looking at these documents together is how the history of this military intelligence organization, regardless of its name at the time, appears just deeply intertwined with significant political events in South Korea.
It's not just operating in the background.
Right. The sources don't just list functions like counterintelligence. They document specific instances where operations seemingly intended for military security or defense seem to have, at times, according to these accounts, ventured right into the political arena. And that includes, as we've seen, allegations of coup attempts, influencing events like Gwangju, surveillance on civilians, and these documented self-coup plans.
It seems the sources themselves implicitly raise that question, don't they, about where the boundary lies between military intelligence protecting the state and potentially overstepping into political power dynamics.
Exactly. The pattern of documented controversies, as presented in these sources, it really highlights the recurring challenges and, frankly, the criticisms faced by such a powerful body, tasked with very sensitive security roles, especially within a democratic society.
Yeah.
It's that inherent tension.
Yeah, that tension seems clear. So, to bring this deep dive to a close, we've navigated the history of the South Korean Defense Counterintelligence Command, tracing its path from the 1950 CIC through its various names like MSC and DSC, right up to today's DCC.
And we've covered its essential counterintelligence and security functions, at least as they're listed in your source material.
Right. And crucially, we've spent time on those specific documented historical incidents the sources bring forward, the 1979 events characterized as a coup attempt, the actions during the Gwangju uprising, that case of illegal civilian surveillance, and the alleged self-coup planning detailed in the material, linking different iterations of the command over time.
What's truly fascinating here, strictly based on the source material provided, is just the long arc of this organization's history. It seems marked by both its stated mission of national security and these recurring, quite serious controversies that the documents highlight.
Absolutely. So, thinking about this history we've just explored, based only on the sources you shared, what does it make you consider about that complex relationship between military intelligence, the pursuit or exercise of political power, and the mechanisms of civilian oversight in a democratic system?
Yeah.
It certainly gives you a lot to mull over as you continue learning.